The coronavirus pandemic has become a real serious threat across the globe. It started from China. There is a lot of diplomatic war between the US and China today, discussing and deciding on where the origin of the coronavirus is. While medical experts want everybody to be united, we'll have to see how China and US really tackle this outbreak. Joining me is Professor Peter Lee from Houston University to discuss a little more about the wet markets in China, the trade of wildlife, and how it has become a serious problem. Many thanks for joining us, Professor Lee. If you could begin by explaining to us what are these wet markets of Hankou in Wuhan that has been the epicenter of the outbreak.
The Hankou market in Wuhan is a typical marketplace where you can get almost everything from fresh vegetable to meat, pork, beef, mutton, and seafood. There is also a section where you can get wildlife animals such as snakes, civet cats, and other wildlife animals of about 75 species. But typically people don't go there. So the wildlife animals are sold to small restaurants, I believe. So that's why that's a typical, marketplace.
What are the kind of meats that we can really see people sell at the Wuhan market, which has been the epicenter? Given the fact that there are a lot of reports being very critical of how China has handled wildlife, its policies with regards to meat coming from across the globe, various kinds of species being slaughtered and sold in the Hankou market. So, can you just explain to us what are the kind of animals that are sold in this market?
In China, there is not a clear demarcation as to what can be sold and what cannot be sold. Theoretically, the Chinese government allowed the breeding and marketing of 54 wildlife animals captively bred, but we see a large number of animals wild caught, especially animals which are state protected species. So China's wildlife market is beyond the reach of Chinese laws. There is a complete lawlessness there. So I would say it is a line of business that the Chinese government should crack down upon.
Professor Lee, you speak of many kinds of wildlife. Now, could you just tell us exactly what the rules and regulations and laws of China has been when it comes to trading in wildlife?
China has banned wildlife consumption and wildlife trade, but I would say this is not enough, even though the decision to ban wildlife trade and consumption is the most commendable step taken by the Chinese government. And we hope that the ban will become a permanent policy when China revises its wildlife protection law.
Well, while China has banned any trade in wildlife and the ban was put in place in only January, does that suffice? Will that be enough for China to have temporary bans, or should we look at a long-term ban?
China has the world's biggest animal wildlife farming industry, which has several components like breeding, transporting, and slaughtering. Each one of the component is full of practices that treat animals terribly. So this industry is intrinsically cruel on the farm, on the road, and in the slaughterhouses.
Professor Lee, what are the kind of practices? We know that there are a lot of unethical practices surrounding any treatment of wildlife, particularly in countries like China, but also in terms of how slaughterhouses are kept, how animals are kept. What are the unethical practices that you have studied in Hankou, in the Wuhan market?
It is not a surprise that SARS and the COVID-19 pandemic broke out in China, because China has the world's biggest wildlife farming operation. Large number of wildlife animals, captive bred and wild caught, are kept in very intensive, very crowded environment, and are transported over great distances and in horrible conditions. And when you put large number of wildlife animals, a lot of those animals are sick and dying with injuries. You cannot avoid, cross-infection of diseases, and allow, provide an opportunity for the mutation of viruses, right? So there is it is not a surprise that the epidemic, both pandemics, broke out in China. But I would say, any country with a large scale, wildlife operation or concentrated animal feeding operation, they have to be careful.
This is not the first time that we've seen a pandemic break out of China. SARS also, we saw the origins from China. How do you explain the entire origin of such viruses coming from China? Because there is a lot of misinformation also regarding the outbreaks, viruses, and the spread of the virus.
Yes, we have read about a case in which a man, has died from hantavirus. People can be infected with hantavirus from the feces, blood, and the saliva of rats. Now, this should be another wake-up call for people that they should leave wild animals in the wild, especially snakes in the wild. Right? When you wipe out the snakes from the wild, like in China, in many places, rats got out of control.
After coronavirus, Professor Lee, now we are hearing reports of hantavirus, again origin being China. If you could explain to our viewers what the hantavirus is it dangerous? Can it spread fast, and how can it really spread? Because we know that it spreads through rodents, but how dangerous is it?
It is unfortunate that people would spend the time, spreading misinformation, speculation, and false accusation. Efforts must be, put to, fight the pandemic. It is important for us to understand that scientists are the people to determine the origin of the pandemic, and the politicians and media people should refrain from making, irresponsible remarks. The calling of the pandemic as a Chinese virus is not helpful. It doesn't help anybody. As we understand that the pandemic could happen in any other country where animals are abused, where wildlife animals are exploited.
Professor Lee, while scientists are looking at a cure or a vaccine, governments are looking at tackling and battling the coronavirus outbreak, what is your reading into how long it will take for this entire crisis to tide over? Will weather or temperature really play a role in this? What are the scientific developments when it comes to, or research when it comes to, the coronavirus outbreak?
It is hard to say when the pandemic will be contained. Of course, we cannot wait for the weather to help us. It is important to have a national mobilization, to have a strong leadership from the government, and of course to impose travel restrictions and social distancing. These are all important. And also important to give out accurate information to the society. Pandemic does not discriminate people based on the race, the cultural background, the age, the gender, and the economic, status. Now, it is important for young people to stay away from social gathering and to respect, travel restrictions and social distancing, so that the pandemic can be brought to a halt in the earliest possible time.
Professor Lee, many thanks for joining us here on India Today. Indeed, a pleasure having you explain the issue of coronavirus, the pandemic, and how the governments should be tackling this entire crisis.